Hello everybody, Tyler King here with a new episode of New Review. Today I want to do my first part of my end of the year kind of overview and ranking of certain releases that have come out this year. So today I'm going to be talking about some EPs and some live albums. The next one is going to be reissues, and then the final one is going to be my top 10 albums that have come out this year. I wanted to do these because I hadn't done them before, and I'd seen some other people who I'm subscribed to on here doing them, and it just seemed like a bit of fun. Um, some of these are albums or EPs or releases that are by artists that I probably wouldn't normally talk about on this channel, so this kind of gives me an excuse to talk about them a lot, maybe introduce you to some new music that you haven't heard before, some new artists you weren't familiar with, and yeah, without further ado, let's talk about my top four EPs of the year. The reason why I'm doing four is because I don't think I've heard five. Um, and if I have, I don't own five. I only own four that have come out this year, and I wanted to focus more on stuff that I actually own than stuff that I just heard on something like Apple Music or YouTube, etc. And number four is by an artist that most of you are either familiar with or at least know the name of, and that is Martin Gore with The Third Chimpanzee. The reason why this is number four is because I don't find it that interesting. I know that over the last 15 years or so, Martin Gore has really championed the use of analog synthesizers, Euro rack units, and he has done some experimentation with them on some of the more recent Depeche Mode albums, but on this EP, he really goes all out with it. It is 5 songs, each one named after a different kind of monkey. And I remember after I told my best friend about it, they were like, "You have to be joking! Like, this is not a thing that's coming out." And it sounds a bit goofy. It sounds a bit silly. Um, and the release itself leaves a lot to be desired. Even as somebody who is a fan sometimes of more avant-garde electronic music, progressive electronic music, ambient music, IDM, things like that, uh, there's not really much on here that captivates me or that makes me want to listen to it again. I mean, I give Martin Gore kudos for releasing what he wants to release and recording what he wants to record and, doing what he wants to do. That's great, and I'm not going to take that from him. But the end result is not particularly interesting to me. Um, I think that the strongest song on here is going to be Mandrill, which is the second song on side A. Um, or possibly Capuchin, which is the first song on side B. Um, it's just kind of analog warbling and not a lot of melody, not a lot of like boundaries. Um, and I just wish that as somebody who has really pioneered a lot of things in terms of electronic music, that his releases of this kind of music were more interesting. But as it stands, I think I prefer him as a more traditional songwriter. And number three is the latest release by Angel Olsen. This is called Isles. And what this is 5 covers of different 80s songs. So you have Gloria, Eyes Without a Face, Safety Dance, If You Leave, and Forever Young. And if you're familiar with Angel Olsen's music, it has a sort of wistfulness to it, slower qualities as far as tempos go, very strong powerful, direct vocal delivery. And on this release, she has sort of abandoned the more orchestral elements of her last full-length album, My Woman, as well as the more sort of like 60s pop and acoustic-y singer-songwriter approach of her material from before that. And on here, it's possibly because of the source material, has gone for a more synth pop, new wave, more like a new romantic sort of feel to it. Think Avalon era Roxy music. And I think that the style of music definitely fits her voice well, but her performances of these songs doesn't really add anything to the originals. I think that the two strongest ones on here are Gloria and Eyes Without a Face. But on something like The Safety Dance, which is a very upbeat, kind of cheesy 80s song, by slowing it down and removing that like cheesiness from it and playing it straight, it loses a lot of its charm. And I feel that with Safety Dance, If You Leave, and Forever Young, they are more forgettable than the first two songs on here. Yeah, it's not an unenjoyable listen, but I wish that given the source material, she was able to make them a bit more unique and a bit more her own instead of playing into the original styles of those songs. And so that is my number 3 out of 4. Number 2 is the latest EP by VR Sex, Cybercrimes. This one in particular was released as a double 7-inch. Each release had specially colored vinyl. That is what mine looked like there. So if you're not familiar with VR Sex is the other project by, I believe it's Deb Demure from the band Drab Majesty. And I'm probably going to lose goth points for saying this, but I'm not a Drab Majesty fan at all. However, I really enjoy VR Sex. They're a bit more inspired by like dirty, dingy post-punk. There's some death rock influences in there as well. And on this EP, as well as my number 1 pick, it's sort of a concept release about the dangers of like quote-unquote living digitally. So, for instance, like on the song Minor Case, it's about the access that pedophiles have to underage content online. Lawyer Up is kind of a pseudo-sequel to that. It's only 4 songs. It's incredibly solid. It's incredibly tight. I would highly recommend listening to it if you're into things like maybe like Specimen, Sex Gang Children, maybe Christian Death, maybe early Sisters of Mercy, like First and Last and Always era. Yeah, I think that it's a great work, and it is a worthy follow-up to their debut album that came out a couple of years ago. And my number 1 pick, my favorite EP of the year, is going to be Spies by Daniel Davies. This is the wraparound screen print from the deluxe edition by Sacred Bones. This is what the cover art is supposed to look like, if I can get this out. There we go. So that is it right there. And much like Cybercrimes by VR Sex, Daniel Davies has gone on record as saying that this is a concept album about surveillance and lack of privacy in the modern era. The main difference between VR Sex's EP and Daniel Davies' is that the one by Daniel Davies is entirely instrumental. So it is more. So I'm looking for. My takeaway of that idea of this EP really is based more on what he said than my own interpretation of it. Granted, it is called Spies. The cover is made of this montage of, various faces all kind of uh, compressed together. But it is such a oppressive sounding release, especially opener The Bomber, which starts out as this almost like ambient piece that then evolves into this very like crushing, dense instrumental. And then you have the single from it, which was called, oh my gosh, something of LA. What was it called? Beasts of LA. Yeah, Beasts of LA, which has this almost like militaristic march feel to it. This very dense guitar line being put over it. Dun 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 dun. Yeah, it's definitely a very dense and atmospheric and claustrophobic feeling release. I would very much recommend it if you are a fan of things like John Carpenter soundtracks, if you're into like horror synth, or more like experimental guitar music. Not that I think that this release ever really like goes off the rails, but I don't think it's necessarily for everyone. And I think it's a weird coincidence that this is my favorite EP of the year, because my favorite album of last year was Daniel Davies' album Signals, which was just a bit more atmospheric and a bit more ambient overall than this release. This one is a bit more focused, has a little bit more of a bite to it. And it is my favorite EP of 2021. And now on to my 5 favorite live albums that were released this year. Before I present these 5, I did want to put in a disclaimer that I'm not going to include any of the David Bowie albums from the Brilliant Live Adventure series, for a couple of reasons. First one being that I've already talked about them at length on this channel, and I felt like if I were to include the 2 that came out this year, which were Live at the Kit Kat Club and Look at the Moon, those would be taking spaces away from material that I haven't talked about at length. If I were to include them, At the Kit Kat Club probably wouldn't appear on this list, and Look at the Moon would probably be number 1. But I just felt like I would be doing other releases a disservice by talking more about those when I've already made dedicated videos about both of those releases. The other thing that I thought was interesting when I was putting this list together is that none of these are contemporary releases. What I mean when I say that is that these are live recordings that, I think the most recent one is from about like 20 years ago. And I think all of these were released for Record Store Day on various dates this year, which is also a weird coincidence. But let's start off with my number 5 favorite live album of the year. I'm immediately losing all goth points talking about this one. It is Alternate Live by Fleetwood Mac. This just came out a couple of weeks ago for Record Store Day Black Friday, and it is essentially, it is what the title says. It's an alternate version of the Fleetwood Mac live album from, I think, 1980. And so on here, we do have songs from their second self-titled album, from Rumors, from Tusk, but then we also have a couple of songs from Mirage, and maybe also Tango in the Night. I'm not 100% familiar with that album, unfortunately. But this just has, I mean, amazing performance after amazing performance. Right out the gate, Secondhand News is one of my favorite Lindsey Buckingham songs. The Chain is the song that I think everybody knows. I do think it's weird that they didn't put this song towards the end of the track listing, just because it seems like a very anticlimactic song to put as the second one on the track listing. Um, and, you know, you could make the argument, well, maybe they didn't perform it last, but since this is kind of a compilation of various live recordings, I don't think that it would have hurt them to do that. Um, Stevie Nicks' version of Goldust Woman is great. Christine McVie's version of Hold Me on here is great. Um, Certain songs, I think, don't translate very well live. Tusk is a great example of that. Um, and also, I mean, like, I think Stevie Nicks is fine. She's definitely my least favorite of the, like, big three Fleetwood Mac songwriters. And I think that some of her vocal performances on here, particularly doing backing vocals on, like, Christine or Lindsay's songs, it kind of takes away a bit. She's very much doing that, like, bleeding sheep kind of thing that people make fun of her about. But overall, I mean, it's an incredibly solid collection of songs. If you are a Fleetwood Mac fan, I mean, even if you're just a fan of those first few albums with Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks, I think that this one is definitely worth listening to. Number 4 for top live albums of the year is After the Snow, live by Modern English. Um, I mean, what? I mean, you know, the title, much like the one for the Fleetwood Mac one, really gives it away. It is Modern English performing the album After the Snow from front to back. Um, After the Snow is probably my favorite Modern English song. If you had to twist my favorite Modern English album. If you had to twist my arm, it would be very close toss up between that one and Mesh and Lace. But I think that the performances on here are just as solid as when they released this album 40-ish years ago. Um, the band is completely on their A game. The 1-2 punch of Someone's Calling and Life in the Glad House is just a feast to the ears. You know, if you're a casual fan, of course it has I Melt With You on it, but I always felt like that was, if not the weakest song on After the Snow, then really the one that sticks out like a sore thumb, because the rest of the album and this performance has a kind of like grit and anxious feeling to it that the song I Melt With You completely disregards. But yeah, overall, incredibly solid live performance by Modern English. 100% would recommend checking this out. This is my number 4 spot. My number 3 spot for top live albums of 2021 is going to be Echo and the Bunnymen, live in Liverpool. This one is from, I believe it was recorded 2001. This is a reissue of a CD-only release from 20 years ago. And I am going to do a video on my favorite reissues of the year, but I felt that with this being a live album, it deserved being in this list more than that one. And what a collection of songs. Nothing Lasts Forever, which I think is, you know, a lot of people focus on the first 4 or 5 albums by Echo and the Bunnymen, but for me, Nothing Lasts Forever is one of their best songs. Seven Seas, Never Stop, The Back of Love, opening with Rescue is such a great move. Ian McCulloch's voice, you know, it's not what it once was. I think that his extreme smoking has damaged that more like soft velvety voice that he had, especially earlier in the band's career. But I think that with his more gritty voice, it gives a little bit more of a like lived in feel to some of these songs. I mean, especially like The Killing Moon or Ocean Rain. I mean, you know, and of course they're going to close with that song. Um, it's just an incredibly solid live album. It's a shame that they don't tour the U.S. as often. They're actually a band I've wanted to see for years. Um, I just haven't gotten around to it because you know, various reasons. And I know a few years ago they did a tour in the U.S. doing their first two albums from front to back. And you know, like I was working retail at the time, and they were touring in December, and I couldn't take the days off, and I'm always I'm always gonna be like low-key bitter about that. But hopefully I'll be seeing them next year. And so that is my number 3 spot. And now top 2 live albums of 2021. Number 1, or sorry, number 2. You could say it's a compilation. And that is the Sisters of Mercy BBC Sessions 1981 to 1983? 1984. I'm already getting the name wrong. That's how much I like this one. It is just, like, if you are a fan of early Sisters of Mercy, like the From First to Last and Always era, this is a must-have. It's so interesting hearing a younger Andrew Eldritch before he comes into his own, showing a bit more, for lack of a better term, emotion in some of these performances, particularly the first session, which is a John Peel session, which is the covers of 1969 by the Stooges, which is great. Alice, Good Things, and Floor Show. It's such a strong collection of songs, and it shows that, like, even very early on in their career, the Sisters of Mercy had a very, like, clear-cut idea of who they were and what their, you know, like, for lack of a better term, aesthetic was going to be. I know that their music isn't for everybody. Sometimes it can be a bit dry. Sometimes, you know, it takes itself a bit too seriously. But I think on these early recordings of the band, they hadn't yet reached that level of, like, for lack of a better term, pompousness. And I think it's an incredible treat to listen to if you haven't heard these versions of these songs before. So that was number 2 of my favorite live albums of 2021. Number 1 is going to be Live at Massey Hall, Toronto, Canada, 1985 by Tears for Fears. I mean, what can I say about Tears for Fears and about this live performance? It's basic. I mean, for me, I'm not a massive Tears for Fears fan, but I really enjoy their first 3 albums. So for me, I mean, this is like a perfect live recording. It has everything from, especially their first 2 albums, that I really would want to hear. The opener of Mother's Talk to Broken to Head Over Heels to Pale Shelter, that's just the first side of the first record. I could go to a show, see them play those songs, and I could leave happy. Like, but it goes on and on and on. It's a double album. The band is in incredible form. The performances are absolutely solid. I believe this is a soundboard recording, so the quality of the performance and of the recording itself is just top notch. This is Tears for Fears really at the top of their game, delivering an incredible performance. And of course, yes, they're going to play Everybody Wants to Rule the World and Shout and, like I said, Head Over Heels. But it's really some of the more, like, lesser known songs, like Start of the Breakdown or I Believe or like The Working Hour, that make this just an absolute, like, not only an absolute treat to listen to, but I would say an absolutely essential listen if you're a fan of them and if you're a fan of like like new wave sophistopop music as a whole. And that is my number one pick for my top live album of 2021. Thank you so much for watching. My next video is going to be my top 10 reissues of 2021, which is going to be a little bit more varied. And I want to say thank you for watching. If you want to see this content a little bit earlier, you can always subscribe to my Patreon at patreon.com/new review. I will have a link for that in the description box below. And if you enjoy this content, please feel free to subscribe. Hit that bell notification so that you'll always be made aware of any and all of my posts going forward in the future. And I'm really interested in hearing what your thoughts are about this year as a whole, what your favorite EPs are that came out this year, what your favorite live albums are that came out this year. I really want to, have more of a discussion, which I think is one of the beautiful things about this channel and about music discussion as a whole. And yeah, that is going to be it for now. I'm Tyler King with the New Review. Until next time, keep listening to great music.